Okay, we have our biscuits, we have our tea, we have our fish sticks, and we have our custard. Yep, we are all set and ready to go. Hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone, and in this episode, we're going to be building the famous London Tower Bridge from Metal Earth, and then after, going to the royal wedding. You know, we don't really have to worry about time when you have a TARDIS on your hands. Groovers, let's get down to the workbench and take a look at the package.
Alrighty, Groove Builders, welcome to the workbench. We have our Metal Earth London Tower Bridge and some pretty awesome classic Metal Earth packaging. Look at that. That's very nice. Let's go ahead and take a look at the back. On the back, we get a brief little history on our tower bridge, and in the middle, we get a little look at what it takes to build our model. But we're going to go into a lot more detail about this during our build. Now at the very bottom, we get a nice little QWERTY code that we can scan to get a 360 view of our model while we're building. This can come in handy. Groovers, let's go ahead and open up our package. We have our instructions, and we have our metal. Look at those sheets. These parts are pretty big. Alright, Groovers, let's get building. With our trusty blue cutters in hand, we begin to cut out our first couple of pieces for our London Tower Bridge. London, over its long history, has definitely had quite a few interesting bridges, some that led directly to the London Tower Bridge. But before we get too far, I think it's very important that we go over the instructions for all those new builders out there. So with that, R2, can you give us a hand? Thanks, buddy. Excellent. It looks like our classic Metal Earth instructions. Starting off with the top, we have that classic Metal Earth logo, and then just below to the right, we have that QR code that we can scan to get a 360 view of our model while we're building. This can be very helpful when we're applying different parts of detail onto our model, and sometimes if we need to figure out how a part maybe is shaped, we can also reference this QR code. Just below our QR code, we have a lovely depiction of our London Tower Bridge. Now, down and to the left, we have a very important picture that shows us how our metal models come together. You'll notice it points out the insertion holes, fold lines, and insertion tabs. It's very important that you understand this particular picture because this is how these metal models are constructed, by inserting tabs into insertion holes and securing them with twists or bends. But more on that a little bit later. Just to the right, we have some recommended tools, and with this particular model, they are a little bit skimpish on the tool recommendations, but don't worry, we got you here, right R2? Exactly. Alright guys, for this particular build, I definitely recommend some detailed tweezers, like I do with most of our metal model builds. Getting a good set of detailed tweezers just makes it easier for us to be able to grab tabs in hard to reach places, and you'll be surprised how much those tweezers can come in handy with other things that we build. Another tool, which is pretty much essential for all metal model building, is a really good set of wire cutters. And the reason why you need a good set of wire cutters is for cutting out all of your pieces. If you get a cheap set of wire cutters, they might be okay, but you do run the risk of leaving little spurs of metal on your pieces, which can become a massive headache when you're working with small details. So Groovers, don't skip out on your wire cutters. You'll thank me on that one. Now, a tool for my perfectionist that I would recommend would be a doming set and or a really good dowel set. Now you can totally do it with your tweezers, don't get me wrong, but having these two little tools, that's a doming set and or a dowel set, will make your life a lot easier when trying to bend really hard cylinders or curved pieces. Lastly, but not least, because it's the only tool actually listed under the tool section, is Needlenose Pliers. Now for the most part, I think Needlenose Pliers for this build are a little overkill, but they are very useful for helping you form some of the spars, so keep a good pair at the ready to help you with some of the bigger detail. Below our tools and to the left, we have the all-important circles and triangles. Now Groove Builders, you're going to see these sprinkled throughout all of our instructions, and they're very important to follow because this is how you secure your pieces together. Every single time you see a circle, you want to take your tab as much as you possibly can in your tweezers and fold it over flush to the piece. Now when you see a triangle, you want to take as much of the tab as possible in your tweezers and twist them 90 degrees. For the most part, it's very important to follow the instructions because oftentimes they're telling you to bend certain tabs in certain directions, either for aesthetics or for support. Now sometimes it might be a little bit easier for you to twist or even bend a tab a certain way temporarily until you can secure another piece. You can do this and your tabs will not break. However, too much bending of the tabs will cause them to snap off. And lastly, we have our two diagrams of our metal. Now, these are very important because they contain all of our pieces for our build. I always recommend taking your sheets of metal and orientating them to the diagrams on the instructions. And the reason for this is it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to find our pieces when we need them. And that pretty much sums up our directions for the Metal Earth London Tower Bridge. I know, buddy, that was a lot to cover, but with a bridge as iconic as the Tower Bridge of London, I think it's worth the time. Speaking of time, R2, time was pretty much the reason why this bridge was being built. You see, back in the second half of the 19th century, London was a very busy place. The Thames had a lot of bridges, but they were privately owned, cost a lot of money to cross, and often were clogged with traffic. People naturally hated this, and it became a really big problem. The first thing London did to try to make things a little bit better for everybody was buy the bridges all around central London and make them free. The people liked this, but it didn't fix the problem with congestion. Then the good people east of the famous London Bridge started to demand a bridge be built by them. There was a problem with that. Trade was a big deal, and the Thames was a major vein. Boats needed to be able to get down the river, and a bridge would stop them from doing that. So, engineers got to work, and look at some of these designs. Pretty interesting, right? Some of these designs look really complicated, but that's because it was a complicated problem. But after some debate, and I'm summarizing here, Groovers, they picked the design right here, which looks like the bridge we all know and love. Okay, so they got the design they want, but now they have to build it. Construction started in 1886 and took about 8 years to complete. Two massive pillars containing about 70,000 tons of concrete were struck into the riverbed to support the bridge. Over 11,000 tons of steel was used for the framework for both the towers and walkways. To make the structure more eye-appealing, they cladded the bridge with Cornish granite and Portland stone. This also protected the underlining steel. The center of the bridge was split into two equal parts, which could be raised to allow the river traffic to pass. The idea was not really well received with the public, and a lot of people made jokes and even questioned if the splitting bridge would work. Some people would even speculate how long it would take for the bridge to open. But the London engineers had a plan that would make the bridge very functional indeed. William Armstrong was an expert hydraulic worker, and he was commissioned to make the biggest hydraulic system of its time. It was so strong and reliable that it was used until 1976. The bridge was finally opened on June 30th, 1894 by Prince Edward and his wife, Princess Alexandra. The ceremony was absolutely massive. Everyone came to this party. Since that day, the Tower Bridge has been a proud staple for London and its people.
Welcome back, everybody, and wow, this model looks really awesome and is a lot bigger than I was originally expecting, especially from our basic Metal Earth models. Let's talk about it a little bit more in construction. My first point when it comes to building the London Tower Bridge from Metal Earth is that all the parts are pretty big on it, which is a good thing because if you're looking for something that has a little bit more detail that isn't really too complicated, this is where you want to go. My second point is that there's really not a whole lot of parts on this model, and you might notice that when you look really closely at it. The team over at Metal Earth did a really good job of filling in all the little bits of detail with some laser etching, so that really makes it pop. And at the end of the day, even though it's a simplistic model, it really does look nice. My third and final point is really about these two ends right here. This is the only difficult part that I encountered when building the London Tower Bridge, and I recommend either using a really fine dowel set or mandrel to get these to bend in the proper ways that you need to. I find that if you use tweezers, you're really going to struggle on either end. So again, Groovers, make sure you get a good dowel set or mandrel set to help you with the ends. With that, Groove Builders, let's move on to build time. The London Tower Bridge from Metal Earth has a lot of big parts in it, which makes it pretty easy for us to be able to bend them in the shapes that we need to. I found the majority of my time was spent trying to get the four corners of each of these towers to line up correctly and get into the proper slot. Groove builders, make sure you pre-bend your tabs right there, and you should cruise through it pretty quickly. Overall, this model took me an hour and 30 minutes to build, and I feel like that's going to be about average for most of you out there. And finally, groove builders, my thoughts. You know, groovers, I had a lot of problems thinking of all the things to be able to pack today inside of my suitcase. Then R2 told me to make a bridge and get over it. So I did, and I'll be honest with you, I really did enjoy making this bridge. There's a lot of really good detail all over it, and the parts were really easy to construct. Overall, I think this is a great model for beginners, and if you're going to London, I definitely recommend picking up this model and a few other ones as keepsakes, because these are a lot of fun to build, and at the end of the day, they really do look awesome. Alright, groove builders, that brings us to the end of our show. I had a really good time building the London Tower Bridge with you, and if you guys had a good time, don't forget to press that like button. For more videos like this, hit subscribe as well, as we got all kinds of really cool content coming out in the future. Until next time, groove builders, keep building! Alright, now time for the royal wedding. I'm so excited.